All right. Well, welcome everybody to today's National Data Strategy Forum session on data in a new direction, where we are going to be exploring the latest developments with the data reforms work that DCMS has been leading, namely the publication this week, this Monday, of the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. Before we get to that, I should just probably introduce myself to those of you that don't know me. I'm Sue Daley. I'm Director of Technology and Innovation here at techUK, but very much here today with my National Data Strategy Forum hat on. So I'm co-chair of the National Data Strategy Forum along with DCMS. So really here in that capacity to help lead and maybe chair a bit of a discussion today, where we wanted to bring DCMS colleagues together with the forum to give a bit of an update and outline some information and share some updates on the bill itself, which, as we said, was published on Monday, 192 pages. I have my version here, which I'm sure, like you, I am going through in fine-tooth comb, but there is a lot in there. So what we're going to do today is I hope, help to provide a bit of insight, a bit of information on the bill itself. And then we're going to have some time for some questions as well to the DCMS team. So if you do have questions, please pop them in the Q&A function. And what we'll do is, following a bit of an outline, a bit of a update from Owen at the DCMS team, I've got a few questions myself that have come to us, but then we'll have a bit of time for Q&A as well. And we know, as I said, we have some DCMS, great DCMS colleagues waiting in the wings to answer any of those questions as well, but I'll try and bring them out as we go. So I think that's the housekeeping. So please pop any questions in the Q&A, as somebody I see already is, which is great. So to help us kick us off today, we're really thrilled to have Owen Rowland, who's Deputy Director at DCMS. Now, Owen, really great to have you with us, and really great to have your expertise to kind of kick us off. And perhaps if I can hand over to you to tell us a little bit more about what's happened this week, the bill itself. There's a lot in there, so but really great to have your insights to kick off this discussion, and then we'll go from there. So Owen, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Sue, and thanks everyone else on the line who are joining us today. It's really important to us that we continue to have this ongoing dialogue with the people across the sector. You know, moving on from the consultation response, which we discussed a few weeks ago, into the actual substance of the bill, and really understanding from your perspective how it's looking in terms of trying to achieve the aims we set out in the National Data Strategy of securing that pro-growth data regime, but whilst preserving high data protection standards, and whether we're getting that balance right. So I think it's really important to sort of set the context that, having delivered Brexit, it really is important to the government that we now have the regulatory freedom to create an independent UK data protection framework, and making the best of that opportunity for UK businesses and the public. So the Data Protection Digital Information Bill is aiming to simplify bits of the existing regime whilst maintaining the UK's high standards of data protection, whilst also empowering citizens and improving their lives. And so we're interested in your views on, we'll get into some of that, about the actual practical benefits of the bill. So the bill will do this in several ways. I mean, as has been described, it's actually a really quite diverse bill. It will reduce the burdens on businesses and organisations that impede the responsible use of data, is obviously at the heart of it. Businesses will have the opportunity to protect personal data in a more proportionate and appropriate way, freeing them from unnecessary box ticking, but also will be providing clarity for scientists to help them focus on life-saving and life-enhancing research, rather than wading through unnecessary rules and terminology. And the bill will also remove barriers to international data flows, which will allow the UK to capitalise on its independent status to strike international data partnerships, particularly with some of the world's fastest growing economies. And the legislation will also modernise the Information Commissioner's Office, making sure it has the capabilities and powers to keep pace with organisations and new risks of breaching of data rules, but also giving it the freedom to better allocate its resources, in particular taking on the kind of vision that I thought was set out so well by the new Information Commissioner, John Edwards, last week, in terms of ICO 25, of a real ambitious transformation program, which this legislation will help enable, of having a much more hands-on, engaged approach to data controllers, whilst at the same time taking a really proportionate approach to its enforcement activity and targeted approach, as well as being more accountable to Parliament and the public. And finally, the bill will improve people's lives by enhancing effective use of personal data and delivery of public health care, security, and wider government services. So through a series of initiatives such as digital ID verification, smart data schemes, improving the NHS's data architecture and consistency of standards, and helping the police use databases more efficiently, particularly in relation to its cooperation with the intelligence services and tackling terrorism and other threats. So yes, it's a really wide bill with lots of wide aims. So really interested to go through some of those elements in some detail over the next hour or so. And yeah, I'm really pleased to be joined with the real experts from the data protection team who can get to the detail with you. So how will the bill achieve all of this though? So just very briefly, the bill obviously is in 6 parts. Part 1 changes the data protection framework. Part 2, digital identity verification schemes. Part 3, customer data and business data. Part 4, better sharing of data between public services to improve public service delivery. And Part 5 is the big one about reform to the Information Commissioner's Office. And Part 6 is more the technical and consequential provisions. So Part 1, going into a bit more detail, what we intend to do is make changes to the data protection framework to enable greater data access and sharing in ways that preserve public trust by creating more certainty for organisations about when and how they can responsibly use personal data. So this includes reforms on lawful processing of data, such as subject access requests, automated decision-making, international data transfers, and changes to the way data is shared between intelligence services and law enforcement. So obviously a lot in there. And then Part 2, establishing a regulatory framework for the provision of digital identity verification services in the UK, which will allow public authority to share data with registered private sector bodies for the purposes of identity and eligibility verification, as well as enabling a trusted oversight of digital identity and attribute use in the UK by a new interim governance function. And then on to Part 3. This is led by BES and focuses on customer data and business data, which will enable the sharing upon customer request of customer data with third-party providers offering innovative services such as automatic switching to cheaper or better suited deals and dashboards displaying multiple accounts in one place to enable more efficient and better account management. Part 4 focuses on allowing for that better sharing of data between public services to improve public service delivery, led by the Cabinet Office, but it also contains Home Office provisions to allow for modernising in effect of the registration of births and deaths so that they can be created and held electronically. At the moment, there's a legal obligation to be then held in paper, which is what we're updating. Part 5 focusing on reforms to the Information Commissioner's Office. So I've already mentioned that. But other elements include moving from a corporate sole structure to a board structure. And the measures in this part will also help simplify the biometric regulatory landscape, including transferring some of the functions from the Biometrics Commissioner and Surveillance Camera Commissioner to the ICO itself. So yes, a lot in there. So really looking forward to discussing with you today what you think about these provisions as we go ahead. And we can also get into the detail with my colleagues who are here today as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Owen, and I have to say, great job, because there is a lot in there, and you're absolutely right. There's a lot in there that covers not just GDPR and data protection, but as you say, the base smart data work, the digital ID work that DCMS has been leading on the trust framework, which from my techUK hat on, we're really pleased to see as well. So a lot in there for lots of people. We've already got a few questions coming up, but and I'll come to them as well as we go. But I think, Owen, as we discussed, and perhaps DCMS spoke as well, if there are any questions in particular that you see in the chat that you in the Q&A that you'd like to come in and answer, then please do let me know. But perhaps, Owen, can I start with perhaps what might be slightly unfair of a question, given the 192 pages and there's a lot in there. But what other aspects or what aspect of the bill most excites you in terms of the value and the opportunity that it can offer, particularly in terms of unlocking data for organizations and citizens? You know, what would you highlight? What stands out for you in 192 pages?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting feature of the bill, actually, when I've stepped back and looked at it in the round over the last couple of weeks, how it does actually provide practical benefits to organizations, citizens, in quite a number of different settings, which I think is a reflection of how, I mean, people online will be far more familiar than me with this. The use of data is just, you know, exponentially increasing in terms of both within the private and public sector. So examples of how we're trying to enable some of that through this legislation is some of the really exciting proposals on smart data. So in effect, this is following on the successful open banking scheme, where upon a customer's request, and it's really important, it's voluntary, banks were mandated to share their current account data with authorized third-party providers. And this created a lot of innovation in the fintech market and a better experience for consumers and small businesses across the UK. I understand that open banking has boasted 5 million users as of this year. So we want to sort of see more of this, and that's why the government is enabling the expansion of smart data through this legislation. So it will give the Secretaries of State and Treasury the powers to introduce and mandate participation in future schemes. And customers in a variety of markets should be able to benefit from better access to services, as I mentioned, automatic switching to cheaper or better suited deals, and dashboards which enable you to manage multiple accounts in one place. The other important thing of smart data is obviously a number of us have been involved over the years in terms of the issue of credit access. It's obviously becoming increasingly important in today's economic environment. So by making data more portable, credit should be able to be offered based on a greater number of factors, increasing financial inclusion. And this could help those who need financial aid the most get increased access to support faster. And that's a particularly exciting potential element. Secondly, then, digital verification measures, again, really have to underline these are voluntary proposals. It's not going back to ID cards. I was in the Home Office at the time. It's about giving people the option to prove things about themselves, or others, safely and securely without needing physical proof, only if they choose to do so. And having access to secure and trusted digital ID, a lot of you on the call will know the benefit of that, which really we haven't realised fully enough in the UK. Will open up ID options to people who can't easily access common physical proofs of ID. For example, those unable to afford the cost of acquiring some of those physical documents. And then finally, the other one I point out to is increasing fines for rogue firms. We still haven't quite, we've done some really good work on it, but still we have people hounding some of the most vulnerable people in society with nuisance calls and increasingly texts and emails. So fines under the Privacy and Electronic Communications regulations will be increased and will be rising from a maximum of 500,000 to 4% of global turnover, or 17.5 million, whichever is the greater. So I think that's another sort of statement of intent there, that we are wanting to make sure that we go after those who are still causing such misery. So I think those are some of the main ones I'd bring out.
Oh, thanks, Owen. Good to have your perspective. Now, there's a few questions in the chat that one about what's your definition of smart data, and also should I be able to find a detailed summary of the bill? Now, I think the link to the bill has been put in, in the answers, but we can pop it in again if anyone missed it. But what I would advise is, if you're looking for more like a detailed summary or more explanation, the explanatory notes that go along with the bill is a really, really powerful document, and it's really, really helpful to give, and I see Owen nodding, so I'm sure I hope I've got this right, in terms of giving you a bit more detail in terms of what the different aspects of the bill mean and what they're talking about. So I would say, if you follow the link to the bill and take a look at the explanatory notes, then that should be helpful, and hopefully that answers a few of the definition questions and the summary questions. Now, I have a question in the chat around, which I wanted to kind of bring up anyway, around timings. And one of the questions was around, obviously, candidates for the Prime Minister and changes in government. And this, I think, goes into a little bit of my question around the timetable, the parliamentary timetable, that the bill came out on Monday. Obviously now for those of us in recess of Parliament rises for the summer at the end of this week, and obviously we'll have a I presume then, Owen, we're looking at kind of picking the bill up in September, right? Obviously the question is we could have a new PM there, so I just wondered whether you might be able to just provide any details in terms of parliamentary timetable for the bill or what might happen next.
Yeah, happy to provide what I can at this stage. I mean, the big caveat is we're very much in the hands of the business managers of government, and as you say, there's that slightly minor added complication of a new Prime Minister and Cabinet coming into place from the 5th of September. So in effect, in broad brush terms, we would expect, like most legislation and the size of this legislation, for it to take around 9 months to complete full passage. So we're talking about royal assent we'd be aiming for still by spring 2023. In terms of any greater detail within that framing, it's really hard to give at the moment. I suppose we genuinely can't say when we'd introduce into second reading, let alone committee stage, and then when we're likely to finish Commons and when we're likely to go into the Lords. That really is all up for grabs in terms of competing parliamentary pressures. I would say I'm quietly confident that we're regarded as a relatively well placed piece of legislation that's got a modicum of support. So we'd probably be regarded as a relatively safe bill to continue to sort of progress within that time frame. But so it's all to play for. Royal assent, we think, around the spring, and then, as you say, would be disingenuous if we tried to give you a sense of when we think it will be second reading, when we think we'll go into the different committee stages, when we think we'll finish in the Commons, go into the Lords. You'll be able to look at precedents in that regard to sort of have an estimation yourselves. But I'm quietly confident that we're as well placed as we could be to be ready for the next stages, which would be second reading.
Yeah.
When we get back from recess in early September.
Yeah. And obviously, I think with the forum hat on, we'll obviously look to keep the forum updated on developments as well as we go, right? Because that's the whole one of the main points of the forum is that engagement. Thanks, Owen. And I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, but you're doing brilliantly. So one of the questions I had was around Chapter 1 and the research provisions of will the new statutory definition of scientific research cover commercial research and R&D, and what's the scope of that definition, and will it be further clarified? And then I had a question also in the chat, was our first question actually, around somebody looking for a bit of, from a colleague, would like some reassurances that scientists include social scientists. So I think that's linked to that kind of definition of scientific research and what it would cover. Will that be clarified further, and the scope of the definition? I wonder if that's something that you or any of your colleagues could touch on, because I know that's a really key one that we're being asked quite a bit at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm happy to have a starting go, and then maybe colleagues can come in to give a bit more detail, because it's one that has been asked about in a number of settings. So in terms of the overall approach we're taking, we're moving the definition from recitals of UK GDPR into the operative text to improve that clarity and legal standing of this key definition. And whilst it won't be a word-for-word copy of the current text, the scope will remain the same, which does explicitly include privately funded research, including processing for the purposes of technological development or demonstration. And our approach was to keep the legislative definition broad and give room for the regulator also to provide a more contextual and nuanced approach that can't solely be achieved through just putting it on the legislation. So we also therefore note that the ICO launched its draft guidance for research after our consultations, which states that scientific research, and I'll use quotes here, can also include research carried out in commercial settings and technological development and demonstration. So we've not provided a definition of public interest in the legislation, as this should be assessed on a case-by-case basis by the data controller. But we took this approach as we did not want to risk unintended consequences on making such a definition too narrow or broad if we did bring it in. So hopefully that's helpful clarification. But does anyone else want to come in from DCMS to provide further detail?
Yeah, that's really helpful, Owen. I think it might be good. I know some people are saying they're having a bit of trouble with some of the links. So perhaps as a bit of a and we can follow up on this as a forum update from this, send some of those links to folk as well, Owen, so that they can, you know, have those links afterwards. But is it Isabella, did you want to come in?
Yes, and hi, good morning, everyone.
Hi.
I was going to elaborate a little bit on the specific question on social sciences and whether that was going to be included in the definition, because I think that was a specific question in the Q&A as well. So as Owen explained, we left the definition in the legislation broad, as it was in the GDPR recitals, to give that kind of extra room for the regulator to take that contextual approach that Owen described. And I should just note that the ICO's draft research guidance that was published after our consultation does include social sciences and humanities in the definition of scientific research, and that's a position that we are comfortable with. So just to reassure, I think on that question.
Thanks, Isabella. It's always good to have. Forgive me if my eyes are dotting around a little bit. I'm trying to keep on top of all your great questions, which are really great. So thanks for bringing them in. I know that we had a bit of a question around a bit of a kind of roles of you know, DCMS and the regulators, but also I wanted to ask a question, Owen, around there are several areas in the bill where the Secretary of State is given powers to introduce or, you know, omit elements of some of the provisions of the bill. So particularly around the legitimate interest list. And there are some areas where, you know, Secretary of State could have new powers to review and approve ICO novel and complex guidance. So just wondered whether, you know, you can just elaborate on that, and particularly, are there any concerns that the new powers that are being proposed to the Secretary of State could, because this is something that's very key in our mind, challenge the independence of the regulator and therefore UK adequacy, because we know that adequacy is so vital, right, to, with my techUK hat on, to our members, but also every sector in the industry. And, you know, just something I wonder whether you or any of the DCMS colleagues could respond to, because I know that's something that people will probably have picked up on as well. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm very happy to sort of pick up specifically on those two examples of the broader issue of the use of secondary powers in terms of legitimate interest list and the Secretary of State's new power over statutory case of practice from the ICO. But I guess the first thing is that I think it's right that the nature of the bill actually is that it does actually provide for quite a lot of secondary powers and secondary legislation. I think partly that is just a reflection of the fact that we need to kind of future-proof in this space quite a bit, because you know, we're just unable to sort of fully anticipate the nature of the data protection ecosystem over the next few years. But going into the detail, in terms of you know, one of the most sensitive areas, which is about that list of legitimate interest and the ability to sort of add to it, where the Secretary of State is given power to update the legislation through secondary legislation, we have thought very carefully about the relevant safeguards. So, for example, the Secretary of State will need to consider the rights of data subjects, and particularly children, before adding to the legitimate interest safe list. And any amendments would be subject to parliamentary scrutiny by the affirmative resolution procedure. So it's getting that balance between, we have to enable a certain flex about the future, and getting that balance right between efficient and effective use of data for innovation and lots of public good, whilst ensuring high data protection standards. And then on the other, you know, particularly interesting issue is the Secretary of State approval process for statutory code. So first of all, it's only being introduced for statutory case of practice, not the ICO's routine guidance. And this, we think, forms part of a more robust process that the ICO will be taking. They'll be required to set up a panel of experts when developing the code and carrying out an impact assessment. And the new approvals process will still be followed by a parliamentary approvals process, which will be open and transparent. And if the Secretary of State has any comments on the draft, this will be made public for the ICO to consider before submitting again. So in effect, it's about a more transparent approach, but also recognizing the kind of accountability angle in terms of the Secretary of State having some locus service statutory codes of practice which are intended to achieve the aims set out originally. And there is precedent for this approach, such as the EHRC and Electoral Commission. And this is not a standardized approach across all analogous bodies. We believe that requiring the reasons of not approving the codes provides an important safeguard. And the ICO will continue, however, to operate independently. And the Information Commissioner himself has said that he's comfortable with these provisions. He doesn't think they do impinge upon his independence unnecessarily at all. And the Commission itself has made clear, in terms of adequacy more generally, sorry, the European Commission, that we're not required to have exactly the same rules as the EU in order to be considered adequate. So we think this and other provisions in the bill are not putting at great risk the current adequacy ruling. But we are, again, continuing to work closely with the European Commission and indeed EU member states to understand their perception of the reforms we're taking. Sorry, I've just got a bit of a cough, but hopefully that was helpful.
No, sorry to hear that, Coffer, and I hope you're okay. But thank you, because I know and I see from the chat that there's a number of questions around the importance of adequacy. So thanks for addressing that, and hopefully just I'll pause to see if any of the DCMS colleagues want to come in on that. If not, yeah, give Owen some chance to have a glass of water. And Owen, we had a question actually, perhaps maybe for one of your colleagues, around the PECR reforms in the bill, particularly the new requirement on communication providers to monitor for and report on nuisance calls, and asked if DCMS could outline why it felt necessary to give the ICO these powers when Ofcom already has an active program in this area. And just wondered whether any of the DCMS colleagues could come in or respond or answer that question around that in particular. Is there anybody that wants to pick that one up? Robin, yeah. Hi Robin. Oh, you got your hand up. Brilliant, thanks.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, very happy to take that one. Yeah, of course, Ofcom active in that field, but so are the ICO, very active in enforcing against unsolicited direct marketing calls, and we work very closely with the ICO on these provisions, and it's something that they welcome. In fact, when you look at the ICO's website, many of its sort of high-profile enforcement activity is against is for breaches of PECA, for direct marketing breaches. And these provisions will potentially give the ICO more intelligence information and allow them to go after more sort of rogue direct marketing organisations. So that's why we're doing it. We want to, as Owen said in his introductory remarks, you know, there is more to do to clamp down on nuisance calls activity, and it's a politically popular measure as well. Ministers often, in fact, most of the correspondence we get in our inbox is relates to nuisance calls, because so many people are affected by it. So that's really what drove it. But of course, ICO and the Ofcom, they have a memorandum of understanding as well, and they work very closely together on some of these issues. But it's just an extra tool in the armory, really, for the ICO.
Thanks, Robin. I hope that's helped answer that question. But if anybody wants to pick up on anything, come back. We had a question actually, and Owen, I hope that also helped. We had a question actually around, which was one of the ones that I wanted to kind of raise as well, around the differences between what was in the consultation and what's now in the bill. And obviously that could be a webinar on itself, right? There's a lot, but I wanted to just perhaps just touch on, my question was a little bit around, has government, has DCMS, have you been as ambitious in the bill as you initially set out in the consultation? I suppose that's a similar question in terms of, you know, has the ambition, or do you see the ambition in the bill, you know, as mirrors what was in the consultation back in is that last September now? It's coming up to a while. And just wondered, Owen or any of the team, whether you've got any reflections on that, or anything you wanted to kind of maybe pick up on that.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks for bearing with me. I'm happy to have a first go again, and others can come in who have been along the journey more than I have. But yeah, I'm having looked at the consultation and the consultation response. I mean, I think it's quite clear that the bill delivers very much broadly what the government set out to do originally in the consultation indicated. But at the same time, we have given genuine careful consideration to almost 3,000 consultation responses. As an example of where we have sort of maybe changed the approach that might have happened, is the appointment of the CEO of the ICA. So we originally consulted on the potential of this being an appointed position by the Secretary of State. But feedback was quite clear in the consultation process that would be more in line for the CEO to be appointed by the ICA board. So that's an example of where we have listened as well. But broadly speaking, I think we can all see that in most areas, the intent set out in the consultation is really what's being manifest in the bill. Of course, the other big addition to that is there are elements that weren't in the consultation, particularly in those provisions led by other departments, such as on smart data and the Home Office provisions and the DHSC provisions, which are also in the bill. But I don't know if others want to add to that in DCMS.
Waiting to see if any pops up. Any questions? We did have somebody in the chat. I'm just going to look at my colleague Danny, who's sitting opposite me, about having a bit of problems with the audio coming through. I'm hoping everyone else can hear us, but perhaps perhaps Danny, do you want to see if you can contact that person and see if we can help? I don't see any DCMS hands coming up, so I'll move on and try and bring some of the other questions. Owen, unless, have you seen any questions from the Q&A that you're keen to touch on or answer, Owen, at all?
Not myself, but I don't know if colleagues have any specific ones you want to come in on.
It's really hard to talk and to answer what I'm asking you to do, and also keep an eye on the Q&A. I hope out there we're doing justice, but it's really tricky. But yeah, if any of the DCMS folk, I have a few more questions myself, but just want to give people a chance.
So there's one on responsibility for oversight of digital ID services. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Did you say you might want to come in on that one?
That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I can come back in on that. Hang on, let me just turn the camera on.
Hi, Harry. Good to see you.
Hiya. So just to let you know that we can follow up with any further detailed questions, but I've got an answer for this one. And that really, ultimately, the aim is for the governance to move out of DCMS for digital ID. The bill requires the production of an annual report, part of which will analyse if suitable conditions exist for an external body to take on the governance functions. As responses to the digital identity and attributes consultation highlighted, there's no consensus yet to which body that might be. And in the short term of deciding where that governance should be, it needs to be housed somewhere. So until we decide where it should be housed, it will be held in DCMS. But yeah, ultimately the goal is for it to be moved out of DCMS.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. And with my techUK hat on, we just recently published our third white paper on digital ID, where we talked about that as well, and what industry we'd like to see going forward. So if that helps, happy to discuss that further. Okay, so we have a question which actually I wanted to touch on as well, and I think around automated decision making. So this is the Article 22. So my question was around the future of Article 22. Obviously, there were quite a lot of opinions around this, particularly in regards to how it could impact on the importance of adequacy, as we just talked about before. I suppose, Owen, can you or one of your colleagues perhaps just walk us through and explain a little bit more the changes to that part of the bill in a bit more detail, and how will Article 22's changes, particularly I have in mind how it relates to the AI policy paper that was published this Monday as well, because obviously there's a linkage there. And then the question really around, in terms of safeguards and data rights, talks about automated decision making. And I don't know if you can see the question there. Could you expand more on how the balance is to be achieved in terms of removing barriers for businesses and retaining high standards of protection? So I think these are, and forgive me, that question is obviously much broader, but I think there's a linkage there with Article 22, I think, as well. So if that made sense, just perhaps combining those questions. So I wondered if, let's start with what's the bill proposing around Article 22 now, and then I don't know if you or the team want to touch on more broadly the kind of safeguards and data rights question, because that's so key to getting this right as well, right? It's not just about, it's not just, it is first and foremost about getting this right for people and citizens' rights, as well as for, unlocking the power of data as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm happy to have a go on in terms of the overall kind of intent and therefore the approach in relation to Article 22 and its consistency with the broader kind of reform in the IA space, sort of indicated by the paper that was produced earlier this week. But others can come in as well. But overall, the government wants to rely on proposals in this area, as I said, with this broader approach to governing AI-powered automated decision-making, that as is starting to be set out in that AI governance white paper. But reforms to Article 22 are intended to enable the deployment of AI-powered automated decision-making. Again, getting a balance right between providing scope for innovation whilst having appropriate safeguards in place. And so we're pursuing 4 broad reforms to try and get that right. First of all, clarifying the scope of Article 22 in UK GDPR. So this measure relates to the current ambiguity over the meaning of automated decision-making that can produce legal or similarly significant effects on data subjects. So that's where it currently is. And this is one of the key areas of interdependence with the AI governance white paper, which will explore approaches to determining the significance or risk associated with the outcomes produced by such technologies. So the reformed Article 22 will provide a regulation-making power to enable future clarification of how the threshold of significance ought to be understood under data protection law, vis-a-vis other regulatory risk interpretations. So this is really complex stuff, but in effect, it's about the actual context, and therefore the definition will probably need to evolve and change as we go along. So we have a starting point of legal or similarly significant effects on data subjects as the definition of automated decision making, but we need to allow for greater kind of clarification of what that means in practice, totally consistent with the wider AI governance reforms. And that's why we're putting in place that regulation making power to enable that future clarification. Secondly, in terms of meaningful human involvement, so we're putting in place an amendment to both Article 22.1 and 22.3 of UK GDPR to include any human involvement on the part of the controller with regard to reviewing a significant automated decision should be meaningful. So we envisage, again, guidance will appropriately set out the kind of human participation that will constitute meaningful involvement across relevant life cycle stages. So you've got your significant, and then you've got your meaningful human involvement, which will require further guidance, which is allowed for through the legislation. And then casting Article 22 as an ex post right. So this means it aims to clarify the issues commonly experienced with the interpretation of Article 22 UK GDPR already. The government's position is that Article 22 shouldn't be interpreted as a general prohibition, but as an ex post right to specific safeguards. So automated decision making that falls within the scope of Article 22 will therefore no longer be confined to the bases or the exemptions under existing Article 22.2. And the safeguards will be extended across the legal bases. And then finally, on the safeguards, there's a significant amount of overlap in the safeguards set out in Article 22.3 and those set out for Article 22b in Section 14 of the Data Protection Act 2018. So these reforms will see those safeguards unified in a reformed Article 22, which will apply across all the bases on which in scope automated decision making is carried out. Again, it's about the simplification and helping to clarify what are the actual safeguards. And these include the right to be provided with information with respect to significant decisions taken using solely automated processing, to contest such decisions, and to seek human intervention. So again, bringing all of those safeguards and rights more clearly into one place. And the reforms will preserve the existing safeguards, and that's important to underline. And we do not believe that any of the proposals should lead to any sort of adequacy risks in this respect. But I don't know whether colleagues would like to come in to add to any of that.
Yeah, I see Isabella has a hand up, but Owen, thank you. That already, that's a lot there's a lot in there to unpack, but that's really helpful. Isabella, over to you.
Yes, so I think that's really the key message that Owen mentioned at the very end there, is that all of the safeguards are retained, but we are basically expanding them across all of the legal bases, because the evidence we've seen as part of the consultation really kind of demonstrated that organizations currently are shoehorning some of their activities within the kind of current 3 exemptions, and that wasn't seen to be kind of right, and also didn't really have the right safeguards that come with more appropriate legal basis as well. So that's very much the intention, very much a kind of simplification and hopefully clarification of the article as well, to readdress that kind of ambiguity, and also the kind of, the fact that the article at the moment is sort of rarely well understood or appropriately understood. So that's what we're hoping to achieve with these reforms, and then kind of working with the Office for AI on the white paper, because a lot of the ADM is increasingly AI driven, so there's a lot of kind of interdependencies there that Owen also described as part of the reforms.
Thanks, Isabella, really helpful. Anything else anybody wants to come in? I'm just looking for hands. Robin.
Hi again, everyone. I noticed in the Q&A there are quite a few, well, at least 2 questions on issues around data protection officers.
Yeah, you read my mind.
Assessment.
I was just about to come to that. And I had a particular question I wanted to raise around, there any concern that a reduction in compliance obligations, so like the removal of the DPOs and DPIs, may end up hindering, scaling companies looking to do more, and particularly entering EU markets as well. I think Robin's had to run somewhere, so perhaps it's the beauty of this new world. Thanks for coming back, Robin. But yeah, I had a similar question around the kind of compliance and DPOs and DPIs, particularly in terms of is removing those requirements. We had a question around what will that actually mean in practice, but could it end up, hindering companies looking to scale, and particularly into EU markets? But are you okay, Robin? Have you got to run off? You okay?
So I'm really sorry, but somebody's knocking at my door. So can I just go? If you want to maybe answer another question, and then I'll come back to DPOs and data protection impact assessments in a minute.
No problem at all. We completely understand. We all live in this new world, right? No problem, Robin. So we will definitely touch on that question in a moment. And I will just ask, I've just got something I wanted to say, but we'll just ask the DCMS colleagues to have a look to see if there are any other questions there that they'd be keen to answer. But before I do that, I know we had a few people ask for the link to the AI policy paper that came out. I think that was Monday as well. It's been a busy week, right? Yeah. And we'll share that link, I think, following this session with all the forum members and everybody that's dialed onto this. So, but you can get it if you go to the Office for AI website or the DCMS website. You should be able to find it there. But Owen, is you okay? Is there something you wanted to come in on?
I think if it's okay, I think it is worth giving a bit more detail on adequacy, because quite rightly a number of your colleagues are saying, I run a small business and we're still concerned about any jeopardy to use data adequacy decision. What research can you give? So if it's okay, I'll hand over to Isabel to maybe go into a bit more detail on the approach we've taken to consideration of adequacy and our assessment of it.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, because it is such a key issue. Thanks, Isabel.
Yes, sorry, I was having some issues unmuting there. So I think it's very much as what Owen has set out at the start as well. We've taken a very consultative approach with the European Commission, and it's very much the intention to take kind of specific concerns into account and design where we've landed is our assessment that it is compatible with the UK's adequacy decisions, and as we all know, adequacy policy. It's not a sort of letter by letter test. It's very much kind of the spirit of how outcomes are reached, and so we are confident that that's something that we are able to maintain. And it's not very much not about sort of having the exact same rules in order to be considered adequate, which everyone on this call is aware of. Yeah, I think it's worth just reiterating that we have been in regular contact with the Commission, and that we are reassured that the package overall is striking that balance between maintaining high data protection standards and creating clarity where there might be confusion at this point in time. So yeah, that's a little bit more around sort of how we've been working and considering this on specific proposals and the reform package as a whole.
Thanks, Isabella. So we had a point or question in the chat around so the bill, as we said it right at the top, Owen, amends or kind of adds to, you know, a number of different pieces of legislation, and the bill is pretty difficult to read and piece together. And I think I would just it's a good challenge. I think I would just say to that person, again, I think the explanatory notes are definitely a helpful tool and guide to help with that, because the bill can be quite, and it is quite in areas understandably quite legalistic. For those lawyers on the call, you know, that will be more sensible for you than for others. So the explanatory notes, I think, again, I would just highlight as a really good tool to kind of understand what sections of the bill are talking about. And we'll share that link as well. There is also a question, and I think around lots of talk about guidance, and is it expected that the guidance will come from the ICO, and that will there be a time frame placed upon producing this guidance? I think Owen, I'm right in probably saying that will depend, right? And it will that's probably something that we can't, or something DCMS can't really answer right now, because it will depend on the passage of the bill and also then, you know, what happens next, right?
I think so, but it might be helpful for Em to come in on this to give our judgment of how it will happen.
Oh, thanks. Hi, everybody. So yeah, on that point, yes, you're right. In terms of the timelines and the passage of the bill will massively affect kind of where we end up, but also we will be working with the ICO in terms of working out kind of their capacity and therefore kind of how we manage the kind of commencement of various bits of the new legislation, so that, you know, businesses and organisations aren't left with kind of no guidance and no idea of kind of or detail of how to comply. So I think we'll definitely, it's something we're speaking to the ICO about already, and how we make sure that, as I say, that's done in a way that we get the right things out that we want to get out quickly, but that is kind of supported by guidance alongside.
Thanks, Emily. I think that's really good that those discussions are happening right now, and I know Owen, you mentioned the ICO 25 plan that came out last week as well. I think if my forum colleagues from DCMS are listening, it might be good to drop in whatever we send afterwards, the link to that document as well, because I think that's really, really good for people to read through. So basically what we're doing is we're giving you lots of summer reading, right? Lots of things to read while you're, she says, wistfully lying by that pool or lying on that beach. Yeah, so I think, Emily, I know you're still on. Is there anything you wanted to jump in on? I see you eagerly wanting to jump, maybe.
All I was going to say was that the ICO 25 plan is also out of consultation, so this isn't a kind of final document. This is for people to feed into, so I would really encourage people to kind of engage in that as well.
That's an excellent point. Well done, well remembered. And also the AI policy document that came out early this week from the Office of AI, that is out for input, I think, until, if I'm remembering right, the 26th of September. So there's an opportunity to feed into that. I know that's something that techUK will be doing, but I'm sure others on this will want to do that as well. We haven't got Robin back yet. I hope all is okay at his door. You're back. Oh, you okay, Robin? Everything all right?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
So I can talk a little bit about the changes to the the accountability chapter in the UK GDPR. So that's chapter 4 of the UK GDPR. And there are a couple of questions in the chat about the new senior responsible individual who would need to be nominated to manage data protection risks within an organisation. So this is how we're approaching the changes to the current DPO provisions. So in the future, they'll need to, organisations will have to show an organisational commitment to data protection by nominating a senior person who is responsible for managing data protection risks. But what the bill is really clear about is that those tasks can be delegated. So if a particular company thought that there was benefit in having an independent expert carry on doing those activities, then they could still appoint an independent expert, a bit like a DPO. But the main aim here is really to give organisations greater flexibility about whether they go outside or not, and this will give them options. Some of the other things that came up, particularly during the consultation, was how important records of processing are to allow organisations to well, identify where their data is and to make sure it's been looked after properly. So you'll see in the bill that we haven't completely removed the requirements to do records of processing activities, but what we have done is tried to really clarify the exemption for small businesses, because we were told that the current exemption it didn't work well enough for small businesses. There was in effect most small businesses did do records of processing, even because the way that the old exemption worked was that if your processing was more than occasional, then you would need a record. So we've tried to clarify that, and the other area is on data protection impact assessments. You will see that there are still impact assessment requirements, but we've tried to link this really clearly to sort of high risk processing, and so there are similarities. So hopefully what you'll see is that we haven't thrown the baby out with the bathwater, but we have made some targeted changes to improve the clarity of some of the provisions. I think the key change is the senior responsible individual change, but the other bits should look fairly similar, but just clearer in certain respects, particularly on the small business exemption. But yeah, I mean, obviously, happy to take any questions outside of the meeting if there are more questions on that.
Thanks, Robin. And yeah, I'm sure. Apologies if we're running out of time if we don't come to a question. I'm sure please reach out to the DCMS team. I'm sure that they will be happy to follow up. We did have one question of and I don't know if anybody from DCMS can answer this. Is there going to be a Keeling schedule coming out, piecing together the DPA 2018 and the DPBIB, which I suppose is the acronym we all have to get used to now? I don't know if anybody can answer that. I know that that's extremely useful for folk. Robin?
Yes, yeah, that is our aim. In an ideal world, we could have done it by introduction, but that wasn't possible. But certainly the aim is to, by the time the bill gets to the debating stages, probably in the autumn, we'll aim to have a Keeling schedule available, because it would really help everybody's understanding of the bill if we could see it sort of mapped out as amended.
Great, thanks, Robin. So we have got 4 minutes left, and I know there are some questions in there that we haven't got to, but I think they will all be captured. So we'll definitely make sure that they're not lost in any way, shape, or form. And I'm sure in the kind of follow up to this with the links, we'll make sure that if anybody wants to get in touch with the DCMS team to talk about anything further, Owen, right, there'll be an opportunity to do that. But just maybe just closing off, I just want to say, I think on behalf of the forum, thank you to DCMS and colleagues, because already in this hour, you've covered quite a lot of what's in the bill. And it is quite a complicated piece of legislation. You know, it is as you know, it is a chunky document, 192 pages. But so thank you, and I'm sure everybody would say thank you for the insights and the information you've shared already, and I'm sure there'll be more and more that we'll need to discuss going forward. So just from as you know, co-chair of the forum, thank you so much to Owen and to Robin and to Isabella and to Emily and all the team on the call. And I think this is a start of a conversation, Owen, right, which we need to keep going and keep talking to the forum with, and we'll think about the best way to do that going forward. But just any closing remarks or any parting messages to people as they perhaps go away and start frantically looking at all these links that we're going to send them and all the documents?
Thanks very much, and again, thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today, because it really is important to us to get your questions and reflections to help us sort of both prepare, but also, you know, a lot of it is going to still be in terms of how we implement through secondary legislation and so on. But you know, we are confident, as of including the feedback we've received through similar engagements, that the bill, you know, is broadly speaking looking like it's getting that balance right between being ambitious and pro-growth and innovation friendly in the ways we've described, whilst continuing to really focus on underpinning trustworthy use of data and not taking unnecessary risks in that regard. But it really is important that, you know, the UK takes this opportunity to reshape its regulatory approach and take these new opportunities with its new regulatory freedoms. And I think it's seen as kind of like an example of, you know, how you can do this responsibly, how you can take responsible use of those new freedoms in a way which helps drive growth and competition whilst maintaining high standards of data protection. But please, it's so helpful for you to continue to challenge and inform us in terms of whether we're getting that right. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Owen, and thank you for particularly you got that cough of speaking so much and providing so much information. Thank you so much. So a few questions in the chat we didn't get the Q&A. Apologies, we didn't get to, but we'll obviously pass those on. I saw another call for a definition of smart data. I would have a look at the BEIS work on smart data. There's more information on the BEIS website on smart data that I'm sure will be helpful. But if that person needs a bit of help, I'm looking at my colleague Danny across the table that runs techUK's work on smart data. Do get in touch with Danny and we can see if we can help with that as well. But Owen, I'm going to wrap us up. We're hitting the hour and it's time for people to go and grab their data protection and bill and grab a sandwich maybe and start reading. But look, thank you everybody for joining. It's a really important opportunity to talk to the DCMS team about the bill and what comes next. I'm really thrilled that we have managed to have forum sessions where we've managed to get you all up to speed, and we'll continue to look for opportunities to do that. So please get in touch if you think there's a way the forum could help in this process as we go forward. But thank you everybody for joining us today. We look forward to talking to you all again very soon. And thank you, Owen, and everybody the DCMS team that have helped set this up as well. And yeah, more to talk about going forward. But with that, I will say have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye. Bye-bye. Thanks, Owen.
Thank you all.